Good evening. Welcome to Rose City Politics. It is the 3rd of February. The year is off to a start. We have a very good show here tonight. We're going to get right into it after some introductions. Of course, let's just go right into our special guest who's here. Bottom right corner of the screen, at least on my screen, that's how it is. I don't know if that's how it is on yours at home. We have Julian Villafuerte, a former Windsorite and current urban planning student at McGill. How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, it's been like pretty well a full year since we had you last time. Really fortuitous that we're bringing you back on. There's no coincidence about the fact that you're coming back for it, just the timing. We're really excited to be able to link together what we talked about last time with you, which was your talent and retention report that you had put together, and we're obviously going to be talking about that tonight and comparing it to our main topic, which I will be getting to. But first,
is it a coincidence that he did a talent retention thing and then moved away?
Is it a coincidence that you took the only joke I had really coming up, Don?
Look, man, you gotta be quick. I'm not here for the good takes on data numbers.
Well, that is Don Merrifield. Might as well just use that as the introduction for him. We also have Doug Sartori here tonight. Doug, how are you and how was the monorail ride?
Well, we're going to find out, right? I'm doing great. I'm excited. We were talking before the show. This is like my Super Bowl because this is a topic that I really care about and I'm passionate about. So I'm loaded for bear tonight. Really excited.
Well, we are excited to talk about it. I'm excited to hear a bunch of different viewpoints on it. And of course, I'm sure the audience is excited as well. A bunch of them are Patreon subscribers. Thank you. If you are, if you're not, head on over to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. And we are broadcasting live on tape. And as always, Rose City Politics is brought to you with the kind support of Leuna 625, Building Better Communities. And be sure to check us out in BizX magazine this month. We have a column there. It talks about the upcoming budget. I think, we've seen a few comments from the mayors about it today. The upcoming budget, projected deficit, I think, of $38 million that we're going to have to figure out how to account for. So if you want to see how Don, Doug, and I talked about it, head over to BizX magazine, grab a copy where you can in a lockdown, or head to their website and take a read. Tonight, though, as I was teasing when we first started out, we are going to be discussing a London, UK policy firm that says to spur Windsor economic development, it's time to partner with Detroit. Now, Windsor Star's Trevor Wilhelm did a piece about this, but I'm going to say our own Doug Sartori did a much deeper dive on this report. So while we always love our local media friends here and the content that they put out for us, I'm going to just sort of skim over this part here because I want to get straight to the conversation. So Public First, they're a public policy strategy and research consultancy that was hired by the city of Windsor, is suggesting striking a Windsor-Detroit Board of Trade. The firm's founding partner says that Windsor has all the advantages of the Canadian system: healthcare, immigration policies. The fact, though, that we are a small city with low crime that sits on the border and it's easy for people to operate in both countries at once, well, that's the key driver, says Wolf, who is a former advisor to UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now, she sees this as the lowest hanging fruit, this Michigan, Detroit, and Windsor vibe that we could try to connect on. The city hired Public First to develop an economic development strategy looking at both short and long-term goals. The result was a 115-page report that took 6 months to develop. Now, we weren't able to find out how much this costs, but the mayor's office says that last year there was up to $400,000 to be spent on economic development initiatives in addition to what Weed Seed does, the Economic Development Corporation. So we can presume the number is probably somewhere in that six-figure range, probably close to $400,000. So the report, it's really interesting. I did a read through it. As I said, Doug did a really deep dive into it, an analysis on it. and it focuses on, you know, some key growth factors. It says that scale, sectors and clusters, people and clusters, and competitiveness are some of the things that we need to be focusing on if we want to be able to, you know, drive this kind of economic development. But before we get into this report specifically, we want to set the stage a little bit for you all, because this is not the first time that the city of Windsor has seen a economic development report released, let alone economic development initiatives, of course. So we decided to take a little look back over the past 10 years and wanted to list off some of the top economic development initiatives of the past decade. And I thought, you know, coming in at number one, Eddie Francis and Sandra Prupatello, when they were a tag team duo, when he was the mayor and when she became the CEO of Weedsea, obviously that ended not in the most spectacular way. And we've spoken about that at length before. The two of them, they were like Penn and Teller. They were, well, no, that's a really bad example because they both talked a lot. There wasn't a silent one out of the two of them, but they were great. They were show people. They were out there. They were razzling and dazzling. You know, it didn't necessarily, you know, bring about the returns that I think either of them were hoping for. But in terms of initiatives and making noise, it was a really big deal. It was a big get, you know, former Ontario minister to be double minister to be able to join that team. And I think a lot of people had hoped that it would have turned out differently. But we all remember the mayor really focused as well on, what was it? There was the electric battery buses. That was a big one.
Call
There was-
centers.
Yep, CS Wind. Then there was, I guess the most tangible one would be the airport hub.
Yeah, the
and
logistics
retrofit.
hub at the airport with the trucking companies that never showed up. It's fantastic.
We did have the opportunity, though, to house a lot of Boeing Max once those were grounded. So, you know, you take the good when you get it done. Coming up after that was the Amazon bid. Don't want to go too much into that, but it's interesting, though, that the Amazon bid does come up in this report, in that, you know, linking with Detroit context. Coming in at number 3, sports tourism. Remember, Don, when we got into the sports tourism game here? My thought about sports tourism when it first happened was this, you know, this doesn't seem like you're really grabbing for low-hanging fruit. Seems like you're really trying to build something specific here. And speaking of building, as a result of our sports tourism, we have a floundering aquatic center.
Sounds like a Windsor development project to me.
Anything about that surprise you, Doug, how that sports tourism one turned out?
No, not really. You know, it's interesting when you look at this list, and there are more to come. You can kind of separate the different eras and the different efforts of economic development. You know, you characterized the Eddie Francis and Sandra Pupatello tour. I think that was the swing for the fences era. You know, not only did Mr. Francis go across the country, he also traveled around the world and did a lot of junkets looking for economic development opportunities and foreign direct investment. Didn't really materialize. And I would say that the sports tourism era was an era of a little bit smaller ball. You know, it was, I think, looking for some very tangible short-term gains. You know, there are a lot of supporters of that idea. There are a lot of people who thought that that was something that was really going to bear fruit for Windsor. And I'm not so sure that it has been effective, but it definitely is quite a different look from the home run seeking era.
I like how you put that. That's a really interesting way to contextualize it. Moving beyond that, I don't know. This one was a little bit tongue in cheek when I first put it onto the list, but I think it actually does apply. Just seeking federal and provincial funding, going through a lot of the press releases that are on Weedseed's, you know, news board that they have up. It goes back to about 2011, 2012. A lot of them are just trying to grab on to specific initiatives that are announced. You can see that a lot of them are federal initiatives under the Harper government, and then a lot were under the successive Liberal governments in the province. Most notable one that I could think of was the Ontario Music Fund announcements that were happening, trying to turn the region more into a recording and production studio. City So that, tongue in cheek at the outset, but there's nothing wrong with trying to take the money if it's there. It's just, what's the track record on getting it? And is that actually a diversification strategy or just a keep the engine running until we can figure out what to do next strategy?
Yeah,
well, begging for government money isn't exactly a long-term solution to anything.
You could argue,
mega hospital.
I think, yeah, you could argue, I think that strategy continues. And I was just going to mention the mega hospital exactly. Like, there, when proponents talk about that plan, they talk about $2 billion. Healthcare is something that kind of takes a back seat to the investment, and it really is a lot about the money, I think. So that trend continues.
Do you remember when we were looking to become part of the top 7 intelligent cities and how big of a driver that one was, you guys? You want to talk about that a bit from your perspective, because that was, a little bit before I was paying as close attention. So I'd rather your perspective on it.
Yeah, I remember that pretty well. At the time, actually, I was working in an office, and the what is now the We Tech Alliance was then the Soft Tech Alliance, was actually running out of our office space. They were housed inside of a local tech company for a while, and they were very involved in the intelligent communities bid. And just to reference my background here, I really thought that was a low point in terms of economic development, or whatever you want to call that. I really thought that was a low point for us. When you look at the cities that were competing to be the most intelligent city, and it really struck me that this was, second and third tier cities competing for something that was really nothing more than, than a label that you can kind of, slap on your website. That one was, but it was a big deal. There was a big push for that. Windsor Essex was successful in being named the number 7 in the top 10 most intelligent communities. I don't know what that got us, but good for us, I guess.
Good for us, I guess. A lot of that is how this list sort of feels at times.
I'm just making jokes in my head to myself. You guys carry
on. Up next, we had Windsor 180. Remember this one? This took place in 2015, put on by Why Not Windsor Essex and We Tech Alliance. Why Not, an organization that was put together, bringing together a bunch of the, young, connected people in Windsor, trying to help to, turn the direction around. As the name implied, there was a lot of, utilizing Trillium Grant to put it together. It was a conference. There wasn't a huge amount of follow-up beyond it. So I think it leaves it open there to a bit of questions about what the next step of it was, other than, again, I guess, hoping that more funding would be announced to, allow for more and more conferences. And it's not to criticize the hard work, because someone's got to
work at those conferences, so you get a job out of it.
Yep. I mean, and I was involved in some of the meetings for this one, so I say that as a caveat.
Well, so we have you to blame, John.
Yeah, good job, John. Good job. Now you're working for us. Well played.
I think there's a couple things that are really interesting about Windsor 180 that I want to mention. It's important, I think, because it shows you how long youth retention has been an issue and has been in the air in this community. That's 5 years ago, and it was heavily focused on retention. But John, I think you raised a really good point. It was based on a Trillium grant. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people seek grants for lots of reasons. I've been part of organizations that have received Trillium grants before, but when the grant money runs out, the initiative petered out, and I don't think that there was really any measurable impact from it.
Well, not only that, let me ask you a question. Maybe Julian can jump in on this, because he wrote the report, then moved away. Looking at it now, so it's years later. Let's say you're a 20-year-old kid just going to school, blah blah blah. What really has changed to incentivize you to stay in Windsor if you don't want to be in manufacturing sector? agricultural sector, or like a trade type job, like in building and construction.
I
Well,
ask myself that every day.
fundamentally, a lot of the measures have been the same, right? Like in terms of employment in different sectors and like where they've been at. So it's true. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, like I think Windsor 180, it's good, to have things like that are conferences where you develop sort of collective awareness for maybe goals. I think those things are actually really important, and there should be more of them. But I'm not sure if they didn't go far enough, like you're mentioning.
Is it going to be the streetcar? Is that what brings you back?
Maybe, no, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say maybe a streetcar, like an actual one, like the one that you can actually ride in. But there's several pieces. It's a big puzzle, right? So streetcar and a few other things, and maybe I'll consider it.
Maybe the beacons, completing all those waterfront beacons will bring Julian back.
Oh, I'd be so inspired. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Julian, you're wrong, and this report lets you know that you're wrong very clearly.
Ouch.
Coming up second last out of the top economic development strategies initiatives of the past decade, Weedsea's strategic plans. There's a bunch of them, and you can go back now, and it was actually pretty depressing to go back, and you can see here's their 4-year plan, 5-year plan, and then the follow-up, another 5-year plan, and then a follow-up, another plan.
Follow through seems to be a constant problem with anything we try to plan in the city. We like to do conferences, we like to strike task force, we like to do all that kind of stuff, but when they actually come up with anything, it's okay, we did it, we're out, let's move on to the next thing, and nothing ever, and not to be super cynical guy, but nothing ever really seems to change very much.
Yeah, it's the made in Windsor solution. Just keep things going. And coming up last on this list that we had was Detroit. Profit, that kept coming up. Just, hoping that there would be something with Detroit. Obviously, this sentiment started to evolve far more after the recession of 08-09 and the bounce back that the inner core of Detroit immediately saw. But I remember there was a lot of discussion about hoping that we could turn the area into an ancillary film production studio because Michigan was jumping on that with tax credits, and the hope that that would be a forever lasting thing and not just a temporary thing. And we were supposed to build huge footprints to try to do sound stages and compete. That's why, for my background picture, I have RoboCop riding on my back,
Well, and partnering with Detroit on many different things comes up all the time. Look, we're very connected to Detroit because of the auto industry. That's been, a historical thing, but, not to make a joke about it, but it's actually a real question. Has anybody asked Detroit if they're interested in partnering with us?
Yeah.
Windsor? Where is that place?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's funny, but it's also a serious question because we can put all these plans together where it'd be a great idea to partner with a large, American city. But if the American city isn't involved in the whole process from stage one of planning and even running ideas, it's just throwing out nice talking points to make us sound like we're doing something.
So it sounds like we're kind of transitioning to talking about the report. That's a major part of the strategy in the report. And I tend to agree with you, Don. I think that the main question that I was left with in reading over the report and thinking about the pieces of it that talked about our economic interdependence with Detroit, which I think is a true observation. I also think it's something that most people who are from Windsor know in their bones how important that relationship to us is. But what I was left with after reading that is much the same question: what is in it for Detroit? We have had obviously a long history. We've been across the river from Detroit since we've been a city, since they've been a city. So we have a long history together. We have developed economically together. The auto industry and prohibition were a big part of the development of both communities. When Windsor has something that Detroit wants, Windsor knows we're here, or Detroit knows we're here. And they come across the border, whether it be for the advantages they get in manufacturing in Canada when there was an auto pact, or whether it is because we had legal booze and they didn't, or whether it was because there was a a 3-year differential in the drinking age that people were able to take advantage of. There are many reasons and many different times. And when there was an incentive, also casino gambling, when we had casino gambling in Detroit, didn't. Americans would flock over the border. There was more cross-border activity when there were incentives. So to me, the main question that comes out of that piece is, what are we going to do to incentivize Detroit? There are some answers in the report. There are some suggestions, but that, I think, is one of the big unanswered questions.
Is it a risky strategy from a political standpoint to try and partner with an international? We think of Detroit as it's right there, but it's a whole other country. So, just looking at the politics of the last 4 years and even of the new administration over there, they have a very isolationist kind of protectionist, you know, policy going forward. So, I mean, we can try and partner with Detroit all we want, but if the politics on a big scale start saying, well, we're going to isolate ourselves and protect our jobs at the expense of others, it's not really a strategic policy that you can really count on going on indefinitely forward.
Yeah, I really agree, Don. It's not something that's really in our hands, I would say. It's more of a matter between the United States and Canada to decide whether or not, for example, that border is going to be more fluid, or because the thing is that it's not. I think one thing is a lot of people in Windsor have passports and can cross the border semi-fluidly when there's not a pandemic. But the thing, that reciprocity doesn't necessarily exist. So I don't necessarily think that's like a healthy way to kind of like hedge our bets in terms of economic development. And yeah, it's also just like, I don't think that's necessarily like the scope of what this kind of plan should be, because it's just not in our power. Unless, we're suggesting that we want to secede from Canada and join Detroit. That's,
Is that an option? No one mentioned that to me before.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, it's just a joke.
They have a lot warmer weather down there.
But yeah, I'm also like, I was like, that was one of the things that came out in the media about this report a lot. I'm also quite skeptical. Yeah.
Now, did your report that you did touch on Detroit in this aspect at all? Like,
the talent attraction report? Yeah. Like we looked at how much, Detroit contributed to people's decision to move to Windsor. The thing is that it is one of the, it's a big draw, but it is not the top draw, and if the strategy is, attract Michigan, then that would maybe make sense. If that was like the number one draw, if Windsor had absolutely nothing else, then okay, yeah, let's just like give in to Detroit. But the thing is that that's not the case. Like Windsor has a lot of other assets that it can build on. And there's, a lot of people who do move to Windsor, they're not moving because of Detroit. And in fact, like this, it was interesting because like in this research that they did, that Public First did, they surveyed a bunch of people in Ontario about what their perceptions were on Windsor, and a lot of people, that responded to the survey, they said, Detroit was kind of like a negative thing or didn't factor in at all. And then, Public First's reaction in the report was, oh, they should be incentivized. They should want to see Detroit as a good thing. So we just have to sell it to them. But I don't really buy that. Like, I think honestly, like there is a serious barrier, and like people in Windsor who have like grown up here, we're used to crossing the border. We're used to not seeing that as a big barrier. But in terms of like attracting people from, I don't know, anywhere, like even internationally, like it's a barrier that there's an international border, like, and that's not something that's within our power. And there's other, we have advantages as being a Canadian city. So I think that should be really the focus. The Detroit thing is important, but it shouldn't be like the number one thing.
Yeah,
one of the things that, yeah, go ahead, Don, because I'm sure it's a joke.
No, actually, I was just gonna. Thanks. I'm thinking of one now. I was just gonna say anecdotally. Look, I'm in real estate, so I've dealt with a lot of people moving to Windsor over the last 21 years, and no one has ever said to me, "Hey, I'm moving here because Detroit's right there." Once they get here and realize, most people don't even know how close we are to Detroit. I've driven people down Olette Avenue coming over the hump there, and they go, "Oh, Windsor downtown looks great." I go, "No, that's Detroit. It's not Windsor." So I don't think it's a factor at all. I think it's kind of one of those things like, "Oh, well, that's nice. It's there. Maybe I'll use it." But no one has ever moved to Windsor. Any of my clients I've spoken to said, "I'm moving here because Detroit's there, and I want to be close to an American big city."
I just wanted to make the point that, and I think that's a good point, Don, and it's valuable information, that pre-2001, there was a much closer relationship between Windsor and Detroit. That border was a lot more porous. Folks who are younger than the mature young people like Don and I may not remember this, but there was passport free travel across the border. In fact, it was so chill that you could forget your birth certificate and they would just kind of be okay, well, you're a Canadian, and just wave you through. It was a very, very different feel at the border. It was a lot less of a hassle to cross the border than it has been for the past 20 years. And I think that that's a big factor that we have to really think about and address. And that, to Julian's earlier point, that's really out of Windsor's hands in a lot of ways. So that means that we need to get two federal governments involved to try to find some resolutions to these challenges, because that makes the interdependence that we have with Detroit, the economic interdependence, that made it more fragile and more risky. So from that perspective, from the perspective of someone who lived a fairly long time as an adult pre-2001 as well as after, there's no question in my mind that what we had was way better and afforded us a lot more opportunity economically and socially and culturally. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's been 20 years and it still hasn't changed.
I would argue it's, once the border does open up, because, it's been shut for almost a year now. I think it's going to get even more restrictive to cross, whether it's like COVID vaccination passports, potentially. Like, there are going to be further questions about how this makes our interrelationship more difficult. There's a potential for it. And then the other thing that I had to say about this before we move on from this Detroit specific angle here was I found it really funny that they voiced, Windsor has this perception problem, but we can overcome it. And it's like, by focusing on Detroit. And it's like, if you think Windsor has a perception problem, like, geez, like, have you ever watched any pop culture about Detroit over the past 5 years? Let alone the past 45 years. Like,
there's been many a vacation I've been on where you start talking to other people and they go, "Oh, Jesus, you live right across from Detroit. How did you make it out alive?" And I mean, that's recent. That's not, 30 years ago. And the city's better now, but there still is a negative perception of Detroit out, even in American cities.
Yeah, that's where I felt like they really wrote it in on this one, or called it in.
In parallel to the border thickening, the other trend that's been happening over the past few decades is that the population of both cities has been moving away from the river. Detroit has lost population to elsewhere in the U.S., but it's also lost population to its own suburbs. Windsor is not quite in the same dire situation, but certainly there has been pretty hefty population growth, not only at the margins of our city in East Windsor and South Windsor, but also beyond the borders of Windsor. And that's something that is addressed in this report. And they do talk about reorienting the city towards Detroit, making it more about Windsor, Detroit, and less about Windsor, Essex, which I think is a really interesting thing. Going back to what I said a few moments ago, Windsor, Essex wasn't a thing before 2001. It wasn't a thing that you saw people talk about. The region as a whole was not as much in the forefront as it is today in our minds. And I think there's maybe, as an outsider coming in and observing the situation as it is now, Public First consultants were not in a position to see how much that's deteriorated and how many big picture structural reasons there are why that's deteriorated, none of which is to say that I think that strategy isn't a component. I think that Windsor finding ways to exploit the relationship with Detroit and exploit the fact that we're on the border and that there is a major American city just a few minutes away. I think it's really important for us to think hard about that and figure out what is in it for Detroit and how to build those cross-border links. I have some ideas on that that maybe we can get into later, but I do think it's an important component. I just think that there are maybe some challenges that aren't really exposed in the report.
Really surprised still it wasn't the aquatic center that just brought them all across the border. Doesn't make sense to me. As part of the lift strategy as well, in this report. It talks about, infrastructure, specifically 2 infrastructure projects that we have to capitalize on here. I don't think there's any surprise that these are in here. God knows we've been talking about these 2 things every show for the past year, I feel like. But the new bridge is obviously identified, the Gordie Howe Bridge. And then they talk about the new mega hospital and the benefits that that one will bring. Now, Doug, I'm reading here with your notes. You bring up that the second strategy here about the mega hospital, you find it interesting that it's incompatible with one leg of the strategy overall. Now, can you talk about what that aspect is and why?
Sure. So, I think that this report makes much of the need to intensify the population of downtown Windsor, to revive downtown Windsor, and orient the city more geographically towards Detroit. And I think that that is right. I do think that that is something that we should look to do, try to move some of that population back from the margins of our community back towards the center or towards the border. But isn't that really incompatible with citing a major healthcare institution at the very fringe of the city? And I note in the report the writers of the report mention it as a done deal. They, with the location decided. So I felt that that statement was really an attempt to kind of, get out of jail free in terms of how that's dissonant with the rest of the strategy. It's something that I thought was really, really quite interesting.
Julian, I want to bring you in on this one. Obviously, talk about what it takes to draw people and keep people in a city, and why this, that I guess that downtown aspect and the far away from the core aspect play into it.
Yeah. So I thought this report, like, that was in general one of the areas where they were spot on in terms of, realizing, like, with their lift strategy. I think it's like it's a good acronym, and they recognize talent, and they say that it's kind of like the basis of diversifying the economy is having like a highly educated labor force. And then the infrastructure piece is kind of being the basis of the talent piece, because it's, if talent comes depending on how attractive or livable the city is, that's like the idea. And then in the infrastructure piece, they rightfully recognize that revitalizing downtown Windsor should be a strategy. And that's good. And then that was also like one of the main recommendations from the research I did with Workforce Windsor Essex was, that was in the survey, like the number one thing that people in Windsor and Essex said that should be done about Windsor to Essex to make it more attractive is revitalize downtown Windsor. So they're right in, in suggesting that, but it's just interesting. Yeah. Like that they basically in the report, there's this endorsement of the hospital location. Like that's just one, like I thought the report was really perplexing. Like there's a lot of good points, but there's also a lot of contradictions. And that's just one of them too, is that, this doesn't make sense. It's not aligned with your idea of like revitalizing downtown to pull services out of the area and to, just like, literally take employment out of there and healthcare services.
Not to get too detracted on it, the timing, I guess, is very interesting. This comes very, reasonably recently after the council question was asked regarding the location there. And now we have this coming up with another council. It makes me wonder, if the first council question had gone a different way, what would this report look like? Would there be any difference? But of course, that question probably wouldn't have gone another way. It's just, there's the cynicism, I guess, though, that I'll display right here. But let's not.
Just one point I want to make on that, just to kind of pick up on what Julian said. I don't know that it's accurate, Julian, that the report endorses the location of the hospital. I think that the report acknowledges the location of the hospital, but I did not read, and I read the report fairly closely. I did not read any endorsement of that location. I think it's more something that they were, I think that it's something that the report writers were trying to include because it's something they heard from the stakeholders they talked to. I'm sure that many of the stakeholders they spoke to stressed the importance of the hospital, so it was included in the report. And I don't know that there was any glowing endorsement of that location more than just an acknowledgement.
No, you're right. Yeah, there was an acknowledgement of like the location and that city and county had approved of it, so it'll go ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Like that was there. But I guess, yeah.
And I didn't mention what LIFT stood for. Just to make that clear for everyone, that's location, infrastructure, future economy, and talent. But not wanting this to turn into a book report, because we are only on page 13 right now of this report. And, we're having a lot of fun talking about it. Doug, I wanted to shift focus a little bit to the methodology of it, because I know that our listeners are going to go download this report and read it all through page by page by page. So what's going to get them excited about how it was conducted and, the ways that it was followed?
So I think that there are some really crucial things to pull out here. So thank you for asking the question. Um, the the report, this was an expensive report, and it was done by, my understanding is, a public affairs consultancy. It's not necessarily a research group, and I feel that there are some things in this report that I found kind of inexcusably sloppy from my perspective. One of those being, and just one example, I was interested in the numbers that they presented, that Public First presented in this report on gross domestic product per capita in this city. I was really interested in that because I've recently done some data work on that, so I'm fairly familiar with it. And so I got to digging, and in looking in the report, the graph that shows the GDP per capita and all of the graphs that show economic numbers, they're not cited. So there was no citation to explain to me what that data was. So looking at the bibliography, I took a look through the documents in the bibliography, looking for where they were relying on these numbers, where they came up with these numbers, and I couldn't find it there. I found some different numbers from the Conference Board of Canada for a few years in that series, 2001 to 2018, but they didn't match up with the numbers on the graph. So the only numbers that I could find in the bibliography that relate to this data that was being exposed in graphs on the report didn't line up. Now, I'm pretty sure, because I went to StatsCan data tables and I did some work on it to try to repeat the calculations that Public First did to convert all those in-year dollars into 2019 dollars. And the shape of the graph makes sense. The numbers are pretty close. So I'm pretty confident that they used Statistics Canada GDP estimates for a Windsor CMA to generate those graphs. But here's the thing. It shouldn't require me to go digging and researching and relying on previous knowledge to find the source of information that they use for that data. That to me is a challenge. Like I have an issue with that because I think it undermines the credibility of the report. And one more thing I want to mention, and anyone who's interested in the methodology and the data should go check out Fraser Frother's blog, Ginger Politics. He took a deep dive into this report, wrote a couple thousand words on it, including lots and lots about the methodology. But I want to point out that almost every single piece of data in this report is representative of the Windsor Census Metropolitan Area, not the city of Windsor. So here's the thing. The Census Metropolitan Area is Windsor, Amherstburg, Tecumseh, LaSalle, and Lakeshore. So it's about 50% bigger than the population of the city. It's geographically goes all the way out to Lighthouse Cove. That is not, at least to my reading of the report, I didn't see anywhere that was identified as a weakness of the report. But we're not actually looking at data about the city of Windsor in a report on the city of Windsor. To me, that is a real concern. And the reason that I think it's important is that it's actually absolutely critical that we get the kind of data that they have for the CMA. We need that kind of data focused on the city only within the city boundaries. It would be really, really useful for a lot of reasons, because when you add those other municipalities into the CMA and aggregate it, you start to blur some of the issues that I think we're facing here in Windsor. So it's really unfortunate that we spent up to $400,000 to get this report, and we ended up with from what I could see, was data that was either provided to these folks or publicly available data, at least the data on the city of Windsor. and that limitation wasn't called out as a challenge, and it wasn't identified in the list of data points near towards the end of the report. There's a list of data points that Public First suggested Windsor develop, and that would have been a great opportunity to talk about the limitations of the entire report because of the lack of municipality specific data, and to stress how important it would be going forward to have it. And that opportunity was missed. And I'm going on about this because coming out of this report, and I don't want folks to think that I'm completely down or trashing on this report or strategy, but coming out of it, that's something that I think is an important next step. Is we really need to get a handle on information and data about our community so that we can actually plan this stuff effectively.
Julian, I see you nodding your head in agreement there. You're the one going to school currently right now, studying these things that Doug's also talking about. I want you to bounce off of what he just said. Let's see if he's rusty at all.
I generally agree. Like that, they could have made a request to Statistics Canada. You know, it doesn't cost a fraction of $400,000, which was in their budget, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. Like it does highlight a little bit of an issue maybe with the intention of the report. If that's not something that they necessarily like valued, you know, having rigorous data, then for what reason are they writing the report? Yeah, like I found there's another sort of like weakness that I pointed out related to that was a lot of the recommendations that they made were inconsistent with a lot of, like, they did dig up and they did come up with a lot of really good research and good you know, background on other elements of like just generally good city building practice. But then in their recommendations for Windsor, they directly contradict them. Like one thing as an example is they, you know, this isn't related to data necessarily, but just the practice of, you know, investing in cultural amenities or cultural assets, quote unquote. They use that term all the time as a part of a strategy. They mentioned that there's a very little evidential basis for doing that being a sufficient strategy. But then at the end, like that becomes a really big part of like the talent, and then the infrastructure piece is they're just suggesting that, you know, they say literally like that there should be beacons along the waterfront, you know, and like number one, there isn't actually an evidential basis for that. They literally say so in the report, and I don't know, Windsor has a lot of nice cultural amenities already. Like, you know, in the research that I did, nobody complained that there wasn't enough things to do. You know, there's more complaining about like the state of like the appearance of the city and like how difficult it is to get around and so on. So anyway, that's one example.
Now, in their defense, they're English. They drive on the wrong side of the road. They do a lot of weird things over there. So.
Beacons are huge in London.
100%,
they're huge. Yeah. They've got beacons all over the place. You know, I guess it does bring rise to, you know, questions from critics about the intention of the report, as you just mentioned, Julian. Doug, we were talking about in the analysis of it. There is another data point. It's the thing we hear, we bring, it comes up all the time in this city. Windsor is the fourth most ethnically diverse city in Canada. In this report, they just list the City of Windsor website for that. We've talked about this a lot, Doug. This is a sore point for you. I'll give people in this conversation, I'd like, you know, just talk about like the issue there with that one.
Yeah. So I think that again, going to Julian's critique, and I think it's a fair one. And again, I think that you can see this as an important step for the city without without overlooking the flaws and issues with the report. And I think by talking about it in detail, we criticism that is well intended, and I certainly hope that my criticism is well intended. Criticism that is well intended can hopefully lead to better outcomes in the future. So having said that, the report cites Windsor as one of the most diverse cities in Canada and provides as the source for that information the City of Windsor website. So the fact is that Windsor is a diverse city in Canada, but we don't crack the top 10. And interestingly enough, the only list that I could find that listed us as the fourth most diverse city was the report that was actually ranking CMAs by diversity. So here we go back to that census metropolitan area. And the reason that that happens is that the GTA is one CMA, one gigantic CMA containing many, many municipalities, all of which are far more diverse than Windsor. The same, I believe, happens in Vancouver. I believe that the same thing happens where you have the CMA is a bunch of different communities, some of which are extremely diverse. So there's a couple things here that I think are really important to tease out. One, it shows the limitations of drawing conclusions without really rigorously working your data and understanding your data. And really, you know, there are a lot of things in that report that are based on anecdotes, that are based on the stakeholder interviews that were done. I wonder how extensive those stakeholder interviews were. And I think it's really dangerous to take a bunch of data and a bunch of anecdotes and blend it all together and then draw conclusions kind of holistically from it. I think that's really dangerous, and I think that this is an example of it. So it may seem trivial to glom onto one sentence in the report, but I think it really highlights some of the issues that I see.
Now, the report also talks about urban mobility. And we talked about this on the show about 7 months ago. It talks about e-scooters. I don't understand this focus on why a city needs to focus on e-scooters at all until that becomes a situation like you see in some cities where they're just, littered on street corners and old ladies and old men are just falling over them, breaking their legs.
I'm just going to say last year or 2 years ago, me and a bunch of drunk motorcycle guys went down to a place in Tennessee, Knoxville, Tennessee, and those scooters were everywhere. If you're hammered at 2 o'clock in the morning, it is the best economic development strategy you'll ever have. First of all, you got to pay to use them. There's going to be an ambulance involved at some time. There's a healthcare piece to this. I think it's fantastic.
I guess on this, I fall back to my earlier conservative roots. I guess just let the market, work itself out. When the city needs to focus on the e-scooter problem or touting the benefits of the market-based e-scooter solutions, great. Doug, what's your take on this report focusing on something like this at all?
It could be Windsor, head injury capital of Canada.
Maybe it already is, Don. So I found that bit perplexing. The report stresses the importance of alternate transportation and active transportation, and I think that that's a really important truth. And you can see that, I think, if you look at the County of Essex. The County of Essex has done a great job in building cycling infrastructure and walking trails, and they do not have the advantage of density that Windsor has. And yet they're far, far further ahead than Windsor, partly, I think, because active transportation has become a political football in Windsor. But back to your question, I found it really perplexing that the report went to e-scooters instead of cycling infrastructure. And I know we're going to talk about some of the public reaction to this report. It would be fair to say that I think a lot of people who are really passionate about active transportation in our community were publicly and vocally pretty turned off of this report by the e-scooter thing. So I do think it was a bit of a miss. I'm perplexed about that one.
I feel very sorry, John. I just want to say I feel very similarly. There's, again, like, this is another example, and again, not to bash too much on this report because this is some useful stuff in here, but this is just another example of how they're making a recommendation without an evidential basis. Like, I don't know. There's a lot of cities in the world right now that are seeing a lot of benefits from doing, rapid investments, taking the opportunity of COVID to look at active transportation infrastructure. Windsor is largely missing out on that opportunity, and they clearly haven't rallied around the idea of actually cycling infrastructure. And obviously, yeah, you mentioned earlier, like there's a lot of challenges with e-scooters. Actually, one of the questions in the report that or in the research that I did when I surveyed, or with Workforce, we surveyed folks in Windsor and Essex County, and that was actually one of the questions, is whether, to what extent does e-scooters improve the attractiveness of the region versus active transportation infrastructure, and that was there's a clear difference. I think so for bike lanes, it was 40% very and very positively and positively. And then for e-scooters, it was only 27%. So most people didn't care too much about e-scooters. So.
Only Windsor would champion. We're very flat, and active transportation is get on an electronic scooter and go far away and then turn around and come back. Like
Exactly.
I've said this before and I don't want to drone on this, but I mean, it's so clear that this just comes from, the leadership and, administration that's just pushing this thing because they view it as, or it's recreation. And it goes back to that point that if you're trying to view urban mobility and active transportation as a recreational lens, and not through the I'm trying to get to friggin' work lens, it's you're gonna have these initiatives that might leave more than you want on the table. Want to shift, as we are getting close to the end here, to public perception about it, to the reaction that we've seen. I know that we've all sort of scoured Twitter. We've all obviously read through it ourselves. But Doug, you had mentioned that you had seen a bit of reaction there that you wanted to bring up first at the outset.
Yep. Well, so I think there's something really interesting happening here. We've talked about the limitations and challenges of the report, and I think that that's fair and that's a good role for us because I don't really see a lot of that happening in media. So I think it's a really useful thing for us to do. But there's also a lot of good stuff to pull out of here. There is a good, healthy conversation to have. I was struck by the disconnect between different reactions to the report. There is a segment of the population who were very not ready to give this report anything like a fair hearing. And then some of the kind of more glaring stuff that we've talked about a little bit, those voices really attach themselves to those negatives. And I wonder how much of that is because of political polarization in our community. I wonder how much of that is because this report, this initiative, it came out of the mayor's office. It's perceived to be tied to Mayor Dilkens very directly. So I wonder how much of that is coloring folks' perception, and how many people in our community that are just tuning out the mayor and are now not willing to give a new idea or a new proposal even a fair hearing because of where it's coming from.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, the mayor is, of course, a very polarizing figure, and I do wonder how much that loss of trust from the community there could have come into play to, I guess, diminish this report. It is concerning that everything is just swept with a negative view to some people. And how does that come to play into our politics? Don, you've been watching this for a long time. Do you think that kind of issue is one that actually something to be concerned about, or is Doug here just off the rails of the monorail?
Doug is never off the rails. He's the smartest guy on this show. Wasn't even a joke. See, I'm being nice.
You just wrecked it though, buddy.
I know, I ruined the whole thing. I'm going to take something as simple as bike lanes. Let's look at bike lanes. We've been doing this show. Well, I've been doing this show for over a decade, and this show's been going on for long. We've been talking about bike lanes as low-hanging fruit, easy thing to do to kind of improve the, just living within the city. And the city has put on a huge push in the last few years to, because of our infrastructure fiasco that, they're going to be redoing roads, they're going to be doing that kind of stuff. This is easy. Why would you not automatically just put in a bike lane where you're going to building a new road anyway? It's, downtown, when that whole debate came up with Olette Avenue not putting bike lanes there, they redid the whole road and expanded, made it really nice, and they didn't put bike lanes. I mean, this is the easiest thing to do. And then we complain about it, or there's people in the city who complain about it. And we're always trying to fix things that could have easily been done the first time. This isn't the first time we've seen reports come out like this. And I think the fatigue isn't even, on some level with the whole hospital debate. You see what kind of a crap show that turns into, because between two polarizing parties who want two different things, that the general public the normal people who, you know, are just going on about their lives and don't really pay attention to this kind of stuff. It's all, they've heard it 37 times before. They've heard economic diversification since the economic meltdown of around 2007. They've heard, you know, we got to expand from the auto industry. They've heard, you know, we got to improve active transportation from 30 different people. And everything becomes such a fight between two polarizing opposing opinions. And, you know, a lot of the blame gets laid at the mayor's feet because he likes nothing more than to take on these little grassroots groups and just try to pound them into submission. And so I think when you see a report come out like this, and again, this is kind of where I lay on this because you guys are way more involved in this than I am. I'm just kind of, you know, the guy who listens to this stuff. Is it's like, you know what, I've heard this, I don't care, it's not going to go anywhere, it's going to sit on a shelf. We just wasted $400,000 that we could have, you know, built a few homes for people to live in who need help, instead of just throwing money away at, you know, at a report like this that nothing's going to happen. How many 20-year reports, 5-year reports have we had that, you know, nothing ever came of them?
That's a good point. Julian, your thoughts?
Yeah. So I think, you know, one thing that would have just, you know, responding to why is there this like level of animosity, you know, the public reacted like pretty seriously. Honestly, I think a lot of that could have, like, it goes back to the public consultation piece. You know, there wasn't even a, what's it called, like a tender for this, and nor was there an engagement of the general public, like people who were engaged or interviewed. It was just, you know, people who are high up in the private sector and then who are high up in politics. Like, this is not something that people feel a connection with. It's not something that people feel a stake in. And I think it's, you know, like this adds, like, it's like part of like the hospital thing too. Like, there was also like, there's a lot of questions around, was there really an honest attempt to consult the public? And so, you know, the same thing can be said about this, and you know, that just builds, and then there's just mistrust between, like, not just like the public with let's say the mayor, but like the mayor with the public too, like, because this it's just not it's not healthy. Like, this is a negative feedback loop that is not going to lead us, you know, it's not going to help anyway in actually achieving like the important stuff that we're trying to talk about, which is economic diversification.
That was the thing that I was actually thinking about as well, Julian, was just whether or not, you know, the perception from the audience of the report is one thing, but then do you think that the report was almost written in a way to take into account that it's going to be disregarded by a bunch of people? And so, you know, it's cherry picked what was included or what was omitted for that very reason, which then again goes back to what's the usefulness of this and the longevity of this report.
Well, exactly. If that was the intention, then it's a waste of money. So I really hope that it wasn't the intention. I really do hope that this is like a starting point and like for a conversation. And I do hope maybe there will be that public consultation piece, and there will be like a piece of people actually building it, because that is actually what will help, you know, achieve many of these goals. If people feel like they were part of building a plan, and this plan doesn't only belong to, you know, the political establishment, like if it actually belongs to the people of Windsor because they like partook in making it, then you might actually see like many of these things happen. But if that's not the intention, then that's really too bad.
Getting that buy-in from the community, it's always important. This report didn't come with any postcards that we're aware of or any comment cards. But Doug, I've heard that you've gotten a few anonymous comments, some insider comments about this report. So let's drill back into that side of things.
Sure. It's not only the Windsor Star that can do anonymous sources. But kidding aside, I have been working in this space as a volunteer, as an interested community member, in many different roles for a number of years. So I know a lot of people in the ECDev space. And so I asked folks for their thoughts, to share their thoughts with me, not for attribution, but just to be able to get a flavor of it. So I'm going to pick out a few quotes, but I first want to say what really struck me here was the difference in tone from between what the insiders were thinking, what the people who work in the space were thinking, versus what the kind of the very negative reaction from some on social media, and then the people in the middle, I guess, who are the mostly indifferent public. So the themes I think that I pulled out is a lot of people who are what I would characterize as cautiously optimistic. You know, one person said, who is a leader of an organization, if you consider this report a first step in a long process, I'm happy with it as a starting point. The city has a responsibility to engage more people through city council and the mayor's office, defining these ideas in greater detail. Another organization leader told me that, like all good consultants, they tell us what we already know and what many of us have been saying for a long time. My hope is that this will finally get a coherent, collaborative initiative underway with a long-term mandate. Another insider in the economic development space said overall, I thought it was an okay report, nothing special. Honestly, I was hoping for more. Found it a bit too vague in some key areas and oddly specific in less important ones, like the prohibition event, which I think is pretty fair ball. And a community member working in the economic development space said anything that gets us driving towards more good things economically is positive. Some of this we already knew, but it's good to put it all in one document. In general, this type of report is a collection of things most people in the community know and set out next steps. The purpose is to engage, excite, and create a springboard for action. So, very different reactions. And I got to say that those reactions really got me thinking about how we can constructively engage with this report and what council should do with it in order to constructively engage with it and build on it.
Yeah, where do you like? What do we think about the recommendations? I guess, and leave it as the ending point there. You think that any of them are going to be implemented? Like, do you think that council is going to do anything with this report, or is it going to have to sit on a shelf for 10 years and then get voted upon whether or not we're going to fund the 2021 Economic Development Master Plan report from the United Kingdom?
So I really hope that that council. I'm really looking forward to watching the debate on Monday. I'll be watching it either live or time shifting it depending on my schedule. I'm really excited to watch that, and I think there's an opportunity here for council to find a way to move the ball forward. This report, for all the flaws that we've talked about, it elevates the conversation. It's on the agenda at City Council. So what I hope City Council doesn't do is reject it, because I think there are a lot of good ideas that surface here, good ideas that either Public First brought to the table or good ideas from community members and stakeholders. I think there's a lot to think about here. I mentioned some things that I thought would be good next steps, like a commitment to building better quality data for our municipality. I think that would be a really good thing. Setting out some success metrics would be really good. But I have to say, the concern I have with this report politically is that the recommendation is to create essentially an economic development office in the mayor's office. And here's why I think that's a bad idea. I think this report itself is an example of why that is a bad idea. This report was written by consultants who were public affairs consultants, not necessarily researchers who focus on research. It is a political document as much as it is anything else. And that makes sense because it was commissioned by a political office. And I also think that when you look at the process that went into commissioning this report, it's not a transparent process. To my knowledge, there was no RFP issued. There was no, there was no transparent process to try to get the best value for money. We have no idea what the terms of reference given to the consultants were, and I think that's kind of understandable because the mayor's office is a political organization. It is highly driven by avoiding political liability and risk. And that to me is not compatible with what Windsor needs to do with this report, which is have a big, robust, possibly messy public conversation that everybody gets to take part in, and then hold ourselves accountable. Take steps, think about what works and what didn't work, and then move forward with accountability. I think that's really hard to do out of the mayor's office, which is not to say any specific disrespect to the people who work in the mayor's office. It's just not what they're incented to do. I would love to see a committee of council and economic development office set up under city administration. I think that that would work a lot better. That would make a lot more sense. We would still have political control, but it wouldn't be direct political control. And the professional bureaucrats who staff that office could do their work one step removed from political interference.
Don, thoughts on the exit?
Well, being the hopeful cynic that I am, going back to some of my previous comments when I talked about bike lanes and just anything that kind of seems to come from a grassroots organization. I mean, we saw it, with our dearly departed friend Mark Bascario downtown. Every time he tried to do something, it just became an arm wrestling match between him and the mayor. There seems to be an attitude in Windsor, if it doesn't come out of the political spectrum, the people in power, if they don't come up with the idea, it's a bad idea, and they instantly try to crush it. So making a report like this, the hopeful part of the cynical side of me is, now they can take credit for it. They can say we're acting on, ideas that were put in from the report, as opposed to, this organization, grassroots organization, suggested it. So now they can almost take credit for it. And I think, sadly, that's a big part of that's a big issue of what goes on in Windsor when it comes to anything, like just name anything. So, hopefully, they take it and run with it, and they can claim that they did it, and it's all, we can build statues to them one day to their greatness. But I'm cynical, but hopeful.
They will be able to own the mayhem that will be the e-scooter outcome. It'll be completely on their heads. Julian, what's your take on the exit here?
Yeah. So it would be, this is very hopeful, but it would be really great to see this become a starting point for a real community conversation that, that the city would manage, and not start, I don't know, like, it would be really great to see that happen, as much as there's been challenges, and Don just mentioned, there's a little bit of a tough relationship, it seems like, between the city hall.
Don't use me as an out, Julian. You just make your own comments.
Okay, well, you said it. So. Anyway, but yeah, that's kind of what Doug was saying too. This is great as a starting point, but it would be great to actually collect some more data on how the people are reacting, and have them have a stake in the economic diversification plan, and just in general the economic development, the prosperity of Windsor. So that's kind of my, I guess, recommendation to council. So responding, I guess, on that proposal, or the recommendation on the economic development unit, I agree with Doug that it'd be cool to have that, but maybe as part of city administration. It'd be really great to see that become kind of a link that brings economic development, planning, arts and culture, engineering together. City of Hamilton has something that works similar to that, and honestly, Hamilton is doing a lot of cool stuff, and has sort of a similar starting point to Windsor, and I think there's a lot to learn from Hamilton. So that's the recommendation there. And then another, just a final thought that I haven't met, I guess, I don't know if we've talked about this too much, but in my opinion, the scope of this needs to be broadened. There's, for me, a glaring omission in general in this report on the social issues that affect Windsor. There's nothing about, unemployment being a metric, nothing about our situation with poverty, and specifically child poverty. All of these social issues that are, they exacerbate our economic challenges. If we don't address those, we're undermining ourselves. Addressing those things counts as economic development. So I think that absolutely has to be part of this, eventually in the future. So I'll leave it there. Yeah.
I agree with, I guess, everything that's been said, except for whatever Don has said, unless it was, emphatically correct. But, I hope that council does, accept this, take what's good in this. And I really like the idea of, put it through to a committee, and, let the bureaucrats get involved, as you were saying, Doug, specifically. I'm wholly against this idea of putting a dedicated unit in the mayor's office with other groups that are part of it. But I guess he'd have a veto over creating what the full final vision that would eventually go to council is. That would then be most likely a whipped vote in a way that would be favorable. So I'd be really concerned to see this turn into a highly politicized football that will be used to define how the city could look potentially for the next 5 to 10 years. And then we could find ourselves, potentially at a better place, but also potentially at a worse place with one person specifically to blame. So what? Maybe that wouldn't be the worst. No, jokes aside. But I think this has been a really good conversation, you guys. I really like this. It went a lot more in depth than I thought it would. And I'm glad it wasn't just a book report there, because lots of different perspectives. And that's what this show is all about. Julian, thank you so much for joining us. It's so great to have been able to have you here a year later to be able to talk about your report that you wrote and compare and contrast it to this one. The city had a really, really good report that was developed, and they've had it there. And, a lot of the things, there's a lot of themes that were the same in both of it. Would hope that maybe, they look at your report and they give you a call about it and ask you maybe some questions about it and see how it applied. But, maybe we could hold our breath on that one. Who knows? If you are a Patreon subscriber, thank you so much. You make the show possible. If not, please consider heading to patreon.com/Rose City Politics. Thank you to Leuna625, Building Better Communities. And thank you to BizX Magazine. We've got a column there I mentioned at the beginning of the show every month. It's talking about, in the current issue, the budget. We're going to be talking about, surprise, surprise. Should we say what it is, Doug? Do we say what the next topic is? Is that a tease?
Yes, go for it.
No, I'll let you say it. You're talking.
We're talking about economic diversification in our next BizX column.
Doug made a specific request, so we gave it to him. We'll see what the third column is. So thank you to BizX Magazine for this opportunity. It's great to have Rose City Politics back in print.
I think the third column is going to be Don's choice, so it's motorcycles, right, Don?
It's a scooter head injuries and how to avoid them.
Perfect. Well, from us to you, thank you so very much for listening, and make sure that you listen in next week. This is Rose City Politics.